Hello and welcome back to Silent Husband Club. We've missed you and we're truly sorry for the long pause in our uploads. From now on, we'll do our best to bring you a new story every single day. They called us the perfect family. A beautiful wife. 2 radiant children. A life built on years of trust and love. But what do you do when the one person you trusted most becomes a stranger overnight? When the betrayal doesn't just break your heart, it rips through the very soul of your home? If this story resonates with you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Your support helps our channel grow and keeps you updated with new uploads. From the outside, our life looked like something out of a magazine. 17 years of marriage, a cozy home tucked away in the quiet suburb of Evergreen Hills, and 7-year-old twins Isla and Miles, who filled our days with laughter and chaos. We had rituals, we had rhythms. Our neighbors would smile and say we made it look easy. And maybe, for a while, it was. But the truth is, I never cared about appearances. What mattered to me, what truly held us together, was the partnership. The deep, unspoken connection that pulled us through every storm and season of life. Helena was never just my wife. She was my anchor. My mirror. My best friend. We met in our late 20s. Both of us were recovering from long, tangled relationships that had left more scars than memories. She was a professor of environmental sciences, sharp, driven, breathtakingly brilliant. I worked in marketing, helping small startups find a foothold in a crowded world. Our first conversation was at a conference. I remember it vividly. She challenged me in the first 5 minutes, then made me laugh so hard I nearly spilled my drink. That was Helena. Fire and grace, in equal measure. Those early years were electric. We traveled like our lives depended on it, always off the beaten path, always searching for the soul of a place, not just its landmarks. Helena had this uncanny ability to find beauty in forgotten corners of the world. A windswept coastal town no one had heard of, a greasy spoon diner with the best cherry pie we'd ever had. She noticed things. She felt things. And being around her made me feel more alive than I ever had before. When we got married, it didn't feel like a leap, it felt like the most natural next step. Our wedding was small. Just family, close friends, a rented hall with creaky floors and terrible lighting. But there was so much love in that room, it shimmered. We wrote our vows together, word by word. I still remember the way her voice trembled when she said, "I promise to be your ally, your confidant, and your loudest supporter." And I, ever the fool for a punchline, replied with, "I promise to listen, even when I think I'm right." The room erupted in laughter. That was us, love and laughter, side by side. When Isla and Miles were born, everything changed. I know people say that all the time, but for me, it was like stepping through a door into a new world. I'll never forget holding them for the first time. Tiny bodies, wrapped in 2 big hospital blankets, their cries slicing through the sterile air. And just like that, everything else faded. Work. Deadlines. Worries. From that moment on, every decision we made, it was for them. Isla was the dreamer. Always twirling, always singing, always lost in stories of her own making. She'd sit in her room for hours, building entire universes with her stuffed animals and dolls. Miles, on the other hand, was quieter. More precise. He loved puzzles, machines, anything he could take apart and figure out. Together, they were a storm of energy and joy, their laughter echoing through every corner of our home. Helena and I made a pact, not officially, but in spirit, to never let our marriage fall by the wayside. We fought for time together. Even in the chaos of raising twins, we carved out space for each other. Once a week, no matter how tired we were, we'd have our hour. Just us. No phones. No talk about the kids. Just two people remembering why they fell in love. Date nights were sacred. Sometimes it was just takeout on the couch after bedtime, but Helena made it feel special. A candle lit. A glass of wine. Her legs curled under her on the sofa. For those few hours, the world disappeared. And it was just us again. We shared values like others share dessert. Honesty. Respect. Curiosity. Helena was relentless in teaching Isla and Miles about the planet, about kindness, about standing up for what matters. She'd bring them along to our community projects, explain recycling like it was a treasure hunt. She was the kind of mother I had always hoped my children would have. Weekends were a blend of pancakes and library trips. Isla liked blueberries. Miles demanded chocolate chips. After breakfast, we'd head to the park or wander through the library stacks, letting the kids explore until their legs gave out. Sunday afternoons were for movies. Each of us took turns picking. Helena always chose the old animations, The Iron Giant, Spirited Away. And when the kids laughed, really laughed, I'd look at her and see everything I ever needed in one glance. People said we were perfect. That we never argued. That we were always in sync. But of course, that wasn't true. We had our fights about money, about screen time, about the 1,000 little things that pile up when you're raising kids. The difference was, we came back to each other. Helena had this way of diffusing tension with humor, and I had finally learned which battles were worth choosing. We weren't flawless. We were committed. And the passion, God, the passion never faded. Even after years. She kissed me before I left for work, whisper I love you when the lights were off, her fingers brushing my cheek in the dark. She made me feel like the most important man in the world. Like I mattered. At that time, I truly believed we had it all. Not a perfect life, no one does, but a life worth living. A life that was ours. Helena was my teammate in everything. Isla and Miles were growing up happy, healthy, wild. Our house was messy, but it was full of music and pancakes and love. It was our haven. I thought it could weather any storm. But life has a cruel way of shifting beneath your feet when you least expect it. And when I look back now, I realize that even the strongest walls can crack if you're not watching closely enough. Back then, I had no reason to doubt. No warning. No whisper of what was coming. As far as I knew, we were unshakable. It happened on a Tuesday. That ordinary kind of Tuesday, the kind where nothing seems important until everything shatters. I had just landed in Chicago for a client meeting. I remember the gray clouds outside the hotel window, the way the wind bent the trees below like they were made of paper. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. Just 2 lines. Call me. It's about Helena. You need to see this. My chest tightened instantly, not out of paranoia, but instinct. I called. Ethan didn't speak right away. He hesitated, then said, I didn't want to be the one to tell you this. I swear, I didn't. But, someone sent me something. And you have to see it for yourself. A few seconds later, my phone lit up again, images, screenshots, forwarded texts. There she was. Helena. Smiling. Leaning in close to another man. Her hand on his chest. The timestamp told me everything I didn't want to know. This wasn't old. This wasn't innocent. This wasn't explainable. I don't remember putting the phone down. I don't remember how long I stood by that window, staring at nothing. What I remember is the sound, a low, strangled sound coming from my own throat. Betrayal is not just a word. It's a blade. It slices clean, deep, and leaves everything numb in its wake. I had trusted her with my entire being. My past. My present. My children. And now I was staring at digital proof that the woman I had built a life with was someone I no longer recognized. I flew back the next morning, not because I wanted to confront her, but because I had to. Every second away from my kids felt like abandonment. The moment I walked through the door, Helena looked surprised. She tried to smile, but her eyes betrayed her. She knew. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I just handed her the phone and watched her face as the images loaded. She turned pale, then pink, then her lips trembled. At first, she denied. She actually tried to tell me it wasn't what it looked like. But when I mentioned the texts, the way she spoke to him, the things she said about me, the wall crumbled. She sat down, covered her face, and cried. It wasn't a mistake, she said. It wasn't just one time. It had been going on for months. His name was Matthew. Her department head. Married. 2 kids. And apparently, a long history of blurred lines at the office. She talked about feeling lost. About how motherhood changed her. About how I had become too focused on the kids. She said she felt invisible. That he had seen her. Heard her. It wasn't just physical, she said. It made me feel alive again. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. Not for her. Not in that moment. I just nodded. Slowly. Because some part of me had known. Not the details, not the extent, but I had felt her drifting. And I had convinced myself it was stress. Exhaustion. The natural wear and tear of a long marriage. Not this. The days that followed were a blur. I slept on the couch. I picked up the kids from school and smiled like nothing was wrong. I helped Miles build a Lego space station and clapped when Isla showed me a new dance routine. I died inside in silence a little more each night. Helena stayed in the guest room. We barely spoke. When we did, it was tense, awkward, clipped. She asked me once if I hated her. I didn't answer. I still don't know what the answer is. We told the kids after 2 weeks. We had to. They weren't stupid. They knew something had changed. Miles kept asking why Mommy wasn't around as much. Isla had started having nightmares. So we sat them down on the couch. I'll never forget their faces, open, confused, trusting. And how Isla whispered, "Are we still a family?" That was the first time I cried in front of them. Real, broken tears. I told them yes. We would always be a family. But things were going to be different now. The divorce didn't happen overnight. There were mediations. Lawyers. Custody talks. I fought for full custody, not out of vengeance, but protection. I couldn't trust Helena's judgment anymore. Not after what she brought into our home. The court sided with me. Helena was granted supervised visitation and had to begin mandatory therapy. She didn't fight it. Not really. I think she knew she'd already lost everything that mattered. What followed was silence. Not the peaceful kind, the hollow kind. The kind that creeps into the corners of your life and makes itself at home. I went through the motions. Work. Dinners. Bedtime stories. But I was no longer the man I used to be. I had become a version of myself. Thinner. Quieter. Less. And yet, through it all, Isla and Miles gave me purpose. When I wanted to disappear, they pulled me back. With their laughter, their messy art projects, their ridiculous knock-knock jokes. They didn't save me, but they reminded me that there was still something worth saving. And so, I kept going. I thought the worst was behind me. That once the divorce was final and the papers signed, we could begin to build something new, quieter, smaller, but safer. But healing doesn't follow contracts. Pain doesn't respect deadlines. The mornings after Helena left were the hardest. The house felt like a ghost town. Everything looked the same, the furniture, the toys on the floor, the drawings on the fridge, but it was all eerily still. Like the soul had been sucked out of the walls. Isla struggled the most. She'd always been intuitive, emotionally tuned in. One night, while I tucked her in, she asked, "Did Mommy leave because she didn't love us enough?" I couldn't breathe. It was like being hit in the chest with a cinder block. I sat on the edge of her bed and took her small hand in mine. "No, sweetheart. Your mom loves you. Sometimes, adults make choices that don't make sense. But her love for you, that's not what changed." I wanted to believe my own words. I needed her to believe them. Miles was different. Quieter. More withdrawn. He buried himself in his new obsession, robotics. Every evening, he sat at the kitchen table with wires, motors, and gears, building little machines that clumsily walked or blinked lights. He rarely spoke about Helena. But sometimes, when I'd pass by, I'd see him staring blankly at nothing, the screwdriver loose in his hand, lost in thought. I didn't know what to say, so I did what I could. I stood nearby. I helped solder wires when he asked. I watched every test run, even the failures. And when something finally worked, when a tiny robot spun in a circle like it was dancing, he'd smile just a little, and that was enough. I poured myself into the kids, into routines, into keeping our little world turning. Pancakes on Saturdays. Library visits. Drawing contests. I wanted them to feel safe, like their world hadn't crumbled even though mine had. But the nights were brutal. When the house was quiet and there were no more tasks to distract me, that's when the memories returned. Helena's laughter in the kitchen. Her head on my shoulder during movie nights. The way her hand would find mine without looking. And then the images I could never unsee, her hand on another man's chest. Her smile meant for someone else. Those nights broke me in slow motion. Helena, meanwhile, faded into the background. She moved in with her mother across town and began the court-mandated therapy. We communicated only through the co-parenting app, clinical, emotionless. Every message was about timing, pickups, school events. It was civil, cold, efficient. And still, somehow, every time I saw her name light up my phone, my stomach clenched like a fist. She started asking to see the kids more often. At first, I refused. I didn't trust her. Not with them. Not with their hearts. But eventually, I gave in to supervised visits. I sat across the park while they played. Watched her from a distance. She was trying, I'll give her that. She listened when they spoke. She didn't check her phone. She brought Isla art supplies and praised Miles's clunky little robots like they were inventions of genius. But when they left her side and ran back to me, I saw the ache on her face. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt exhaustion. I didn't know if forgiveness was possible, but I knew hatred was poison, and I couldn't afford to sip it anymore. Somewhere in the fog of those months, I found myself again, or at least pieces of who I'd once been. I started running in the mornings, not for fitness, but to outrun my thoughts. I rediscovered photography, something I hadn't touched in years. I bought an old DSLR and began walking the neighborhood after dropping the kids off at school, capturing forgotten fences, crooked mailboxes, a blue jay sitting on a lamppost. The world still had color. I just had to remind myself to look for it. Then came the day I ran into Sophia. We hadn't seen each other in years, a former colleague from a startup project long ago. She was in line behind me at the coffee shop, hair tied back, glasses slipping down her nose, juggling a notebook and a croissant. "Daniel?" she said, a bit hesitant. I turned. It took a second to place her face, and then it hit me, a flood of memories from a different lifetime. We ended up sitting for coffee, catching up like old friends. She'd been through her own storm, a brutal divorce 2 years prior. Her calmness wasn't born of peace, but survival. She got it. She got me. And that, somehow, felt like oxygen. We began meeting casually. No pressure. Coffee walks. Museum visits. She had this way of asking questions that weren't invasive, but always landed right where they needed to. She never pitted me. Never offered cliches. Just space. Just honesty. For the first time since Helena, I felt something stir, not desire, not yet, but hope. And it terrified me. Because part of me was still stuck in the past. Still bracing for impact. Still looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next blindside. But another part, the quieter, braver part, started wondering if maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild. Not the same life. But a new one. A better one. Built on truth. On presence. On pain earned and lessons learned. And if that was possible, then maybe I wasn't as broken as I thought. There's something strange about rebuilding your life from the rubble. It doesn't happen all at once, no moment of triumph, no sudden clarity. It's quiet. Incremental. One good day hidden between 100 bad ones. One small smile from your daughter. One peaceful walk without the weight in your chest. One meal where the silence doesn't scream. That's how it began. That's how I started pulling myself out of the wreckage. Sophia and I never defined what we were. That was the beauty of it. She never demanded answers I didn't have. She never tried to fix me. She simply sat with me in the quiet, in the awkward pauses, in the painful truths. We'd meet at a local art exhibit or walk by the river, sometimes without speaking for minutes at a time. And in those silences, I didn't feel alone. I felt seen. Understood. Human again. At home, Isla and Miles were beginning to stabilize. Our routines became smoother, our home lighter. Isla returned to her gymnastics classes and began winning small medals, nothing big, but it lit up her face. Miles kept building, kept inventing, his confidence growing with each little success. I made sure to be there, really be there, cheering, clapping, celebrating their wins like they were Olympic golds. I knew too well how easily children can internalize pain they didn't cause. My job was to be the constant. The anchor. The one thing they never had to question. Helena still lingered at the edges. Her visits were sparse and supervised. The kids approached them with a mix of excitement and caution, the way you approach something beautiful that once burned you. She was quieter now, more fragile, like a person trying to hold herself together with invisible thread. I never prevented the visits, but I monitored everything closely. I wasn't ready to let her all the way back and not into their lives, and certainly not into mine. One day, out of nowhere, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. From her. Not a text. Not an email. A letter. I stared at the envelope for hours before opening it. The handwriting was still the same, elegant, slanted, unmistakably hers. Inside, she wrote about regret, about how therapy had forced her to face herself. She didn't ask for forgiveness, not directly. Instead, she wrote one line that stayed with me: "I know I can't undo the hurt I caused, but I hope you'll someday stop carrying it." I didn't know how to respond. I didn't respond. But I read that letter every night for a week. Not because I missed her, that part of me had burned away, but because her words were a mirror. I was still carrying it. Her betrayal had become my identity, my shadow, my excuse. I realized I needed to stop defining myself by what was done to me, and start choosing who I was after it. Around that same time, Sophia invited me to a photography workshop outside of town. It was in a quiet village, tucked away between hills and pine trees. A weekend retreat. I almost declined the idea of leaving the kids, even for 2 days, made my chest tighten. But Ethan, my closest friend and the only person who knew every raw detail of what had happened, offered to stay with them. "You need this," he said. "They need you to need something again." So I went. It was the first time in years I remembered what peace felt like. Early mornings with mist rising from the fields, late afternoons spent chasing light through an old barn, evenings around a fire where strangers spoke like old friends. Sophia was radiant there, laughing freely, her guard down, her eyes dancing with something I hadn't seen in so long: hope. One night, as we stood on a wooden bridge taking long exposures of the stars, she looked at me and said, "I think pain breaks us open, but maybe that's the only way light gets in." I didn't kiss her. Not then. But I wanted to. Not out of desperation. Not to fill a void. But because in that moment, for the first time since Helena's betrayal, I felt worthy of something good again. Not perfect. Not storybook. But real. Back home, I felt changed. Not healed, not entirely, but cracked open in a way that made room for something new. I began writing in the evenings. Just fragments, memories, thoughts I hadn't said out loud. Pages and pages of pain, reflection, and small victories. Eventually, those pages turned into chapters. And one night, after the kids had gone to bed and the house was quiet, I sat at my desk, looked at the finished draft of a book I never intended to write, and cried. Not because of the words, but because I'd found my voice again. There's a moment, a quiet, ordinary moment, when you realize the worst is behind you. You don't hear music or see a flash of light. Nothing changes in the room. It's just a sudden breath that doesn't hurt. A laugh that comes naturally. A morning where you wake up and don't feel like you're drowning. For me, that moment came as I watched Isla and Miles race through the park one golden afternoon, their jackets unzipped, hair wild in the wind. I was on a bench, camera in hand, the soft click of the shutter syncing with their joy. And for once, I didn't feel like I was watching someone else's life. I was in it again. The book changed everything. I never meant for anyone to read it, not really. But Ethan convinced me to submit it to a small publisher he had connections with. He said it had something people needed. I laughed at first, but deep down, a part of me hoped he was right. When the call came, the yes, I stood in the middle of my kitchen, frozen, the kids cheering around me like I'd won a lottery. The first copy arrived in a plain box. I held it for a long time before opening it. My name on the cover. My story between the pages. My wounds, my shame, my fight to stand again, all laid bare, not for sympathy, but so that someone out there wouldn't feel as alone as I once did. Helena read it too. I know, because she sent a single message. It broke me. But thank you. That was it. No defensiveness. No explanations. Just that. I stared at those words for a long time, and strangely, I felt peace. Not forgiveness, not in the purest sense, but something close. I no longer needed an apology. I no longer needed to make her understand the depth of the pain. I had carried it long enough. Now, I was ready to set it down. Sophia was there every step of the way. She came to my first reading at a bookstore downtown, sitting in the front row beside Isla and Miles. She didn't speak much afterward, just gave me a long, steady look and a quiet, "I'm proud of you." That meant more than applause ever could. Slowly, we began folding into each other's lives. She met my parents. I met her sister. We didn't rush anything. There were still rough edges in both of us. But where Helena had once filled every room with fire and shadow, Sophia filled it with light. Gentle. Constant. Undemanding. One night, while we were cleaning up after dinner, Miles tugged on my shirt and whispered, "Dad, is Sophia gonna stay for breakfast tomorrow?" I paused, glanced at her, then back at him. "Why do you ask?" I smiled. "Because Isla says if someone stays for pancakes, it means they're family." Sophia overheard. She laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. That Sunday morning, she was at our table. And yes, there were pancakes. Blueberry for Isla. Chocolate chip for Miles. Just like always. Helena, for her part, kept attending therapy. The court slowly began easing her visitation restrictions. We worked out a plan, cautious, respectful. I was never cruel, but I remained guarded. Trust was no longer a currency we shared. Still, the kids needed her in some form. And as much as I hated the history, I wanted them to know that love doesn't vanish just because it fails. One particularly hard night, Isla asked, "Will you ever love Mom again?" It stunned me, not because I hadn't thought about it, but because I didn't expect it from her. I didn't give her a simple answer. I told her the truth. There was a time I loved her with everything I had. But sometimes, love breaks. And when it does, you can't always put the pieces back together. And that's okay. She didn't respond. Just laid her head on my chest and whispered, "I'm glad you didn't break, too." Clara entered our lives not long after. Not as a threat. Not as a replacement. But as someone who quietly supported our healing. She came over on evenings when I was too tired to cook. She helped Isla with art projects, listened to Miles explain his robotic plans with genuine awe. There was no rush. No pressure. Just presence. I don't know if she'll be the one I grow old with. I'm not chasing promises anymore. What I do know is this: love, the real kind, is patient. And we both knew enough about pain to treat something new with care. And so, our life began to take a new shape. Not a perfect one, but ours. The final chapter didn't come with fanfare. No dramatic music. No swelling monologue. Just a crisp autumn morning, a small stage at a local book fair, and two kids in the front row who never stopped believing in me. Isla wore her lucky red scarf, swinging her legs beneath the folding chair, and Miles sat beside her with his camera, determined to document every second. Behind them sat Clara, her hands folded in her lap, her smile soft and quiet like it had always been. I stepped up to the microphone, the wind catching the pages of my new manuscript. The second book. This one wasn't about betrayal or survival. It was about starting over. About how some roots grow deeper after the storm. I cleared my throat, looked up, and began to read. My voice didn't shake this time. I wasn't hiding in my words, I was owning them. Afterward, while people lined up to speak with me or have their books signed, I caught a moment with Isla and Miles. Isla threw her arms around my waist. You didn't cry this time, she whispered. I didn't need to, I said. Miles handed me a Polaroid, a picture he'd taken just as I opened the book on stage. The sunlight was catching the edges of my hair, my face calm, almost proud. You look like you, he said simply. I looked at the photo for a long time. Helena came to the reading, too. She stayed in the back, didn't approach, didn't interrupt. I saw her, though. And she saw me. There was no bitterness. No lingering ache. Just a silent acknowledgement that the chapters we wrote together had ended, and what came next would be written separately. She nodded once before slipping away, unnoticed by most, but not by me. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. That night, after the kids had gone to bed and the dishes were washed and Clara was curled up beside me on the couch with a book in her lap, I stepped out onto the back porch. The sky was clear, and the stars hung like quiet promises above the yard. I sat on the wooden bench I had built months earlier, my first real woodworking project since everything fell apart. It had splinters and crooked nails, but it held. It held. Just like me. I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal. The nights I thought I wouldn't make it. The mornings I faked a smile so my kids wouldn't fall apart. The long runs through the cold, the quiet coffees with Sophia, the slow, patient trust Clara had offered me. I thought about forgiveness, not as a gift to Helena, but as a release from her. I thought about healing, not as a destination, but as a path I was still walking. And I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Not the life I'd planned, but the one I'd rebuilt board by board, breath by breath. A life shaped by pain, yes, but also by love, resilience, and the quiet courage to begin again. And as I sat there in the dark, the night air wrapping around me like a blanket, I smiled a real, full smile, because I knew something now that I hadn't known back then. Even after everything falls apart, you can still grow something beautiful from the wreckage.
Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, shocked you, or simply made you think, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment, your thoughts, your story, your truth. Subscribe for more raw, real, and unforgettable confessions. And if this story made you feel seen, share it. Someone else might need to hear it too. You're not alone here. This channel is a safe space for those who've been betrayed, broken, and rebuilt.